Welcome back to the channel, everybody. Today I'm really excited to have Coach Stephen with us. Stephen's from the other side of the pond in the UK, and he has an incredibly interesting story and a number of client success stories that I think you're going to want to hear. So I'm not going to continue talking. I'm going to just kind of turn it over to Stephen. Stephen, kind of what led you into this change, let's say in professions and becoming Coach Stephen? And can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, let's get the qualifications out of the way. I'm a qualified phlebotomist. I have an honours degree in physiology and health sciences, and I'm a specialist practitioner in obesity and diabetes, and also a qualified advanced personal trainer, getting at least one of my clients to the Olympics. So there you go. But to answer your question about how I got to this way of eating, it's a little bit of a long story. And those qualifications might be of interest to people because my background is pretty varied. I started off really interested in sport. The picture you can just sort of see there is me winning a tennis tournament, actually a singles tournament, and the medals there are for middle distance running. And between that picture on the left and one on the right, the medals on the right, there's a span of 20 years of being really into healthcare and fitness. And this is why I really related to your story, Brett, when you came onto my channel very kindly. And you were so good, by the way. We had you straight back the next day, which is brilliant. So I came to this with a big surprise because I followed absolutely everything that the food guidelines told me to do. Now, most people say, oh, I was terrible. I got overweight. I was eating, pizza, or I was having ice cream and I had this sugar addiction. That wasn't me at all. I really should be the poster boy for the food guidelines because I didn't smoke. I didn't drink. I was active. I was having skim milk. I was eating fruit. I was eating vegetables. I was not eating red meat. I was not eating saturated fat. I was getting all my fiber. And as I got older and older, I just got fatter and sicker. I mean, that's a short story. I'm going to add a little bit more detail for you. So in my 20s, I did a bodybuilding show. You could see my abs. But my mother died of colon cancer, and so did my father. My father died when I was 10, my mother when I was 23, and also a girlfriend, breast cancer. So by the time I was 23, I'd been touched by death quite a bit. Now, my mother and father, they absolutely believed the food guidelines too. I was born in 1964, and I'm 60 now. For those that can do the maths quickly, you were there before me probably. But anyway, and
1 year.
she followed the food guidelines. My mother, she ate the things that all these vegans and vegetarians tell you won't give you colon cancer, and she got colon cancer. She avoided red meat. She avoided saturated fat. We've got actually quite a poor family. So the sort of vegan diet really helped because bran was pretty cheap and fruit and veg was actually quite cheap. We grew our own a little bit. My dad was mistreated by the healthcare profession, told that he had a calcium deficiency and was a week later dead. Unbelievably. My mother was told to lose weight with her colon cancer, and she had a 9-pound cancer growth. So the healthcare system didn't really do us very well. My girlfriend that I lost to breast cancer was the nurse that looked after my mum on the intensive care unit. And she also was very fussy about the way she ate, and she died. So anyway, my eyes were not opened. So here I was, 23, bodybuilding show just ticked off. I'd been to Gold's Gym in America, and I trained in the same gym as a guy called Sean Ray, and I looked awesome. But little did I know, I was eating all the wrong foods and I was going to make myself sick. Now, they say this thing about you can't out-train a bad diet. Well, I did a pretty good job. I was a personal trainer, and then I became an advanced personal trainer, and I did lots and lots of activity. So those guys out there that are watching this thinking, oh, carnivore's rubbish, low carbs are rubbish, keto sucks or whatever. If you're in your 20s or 30s, there may be some problems in the background, because that's what I got really interested in. And when I get to talk about my phlebotomy and how I realized that diabetes is a problem 20 years in the past, which I can prove, because when you look at fasted insulin and blood glucose, there's a correlation between what's happening in the background, but what you think's happening. So even if I'd been taking my blood glucose when I was 20, I would not have realized there was a problem, or in my 30s, because what was happening, I now know, was my insulin was just racking up in the background to keep my blood glucose looking normal or in the range. But of course, your chickens come home to roost, as they say. So I got into my 40s and everything went south. That was it. I had a coronary artery calcium scan of 639. Don't forget, I was an advanced personal trainer, really interested in fitness and in health. So, misinformed, of course. I knew it was going to be bad because this was when I was getting to the end of my 40s and I was beginning to twig that things were not quite right. So, about age 45, I had my specialist practitioner practice in obesity and diabetes, and I was beginning to train as a phlebotomist as well. I hadn't done my degree by this point. The degree was later. And I just knew things were going wrong. I was getting sicker. I had lower left quadrant pain. I had a colonoscopy because I thought I needed to do that because of my family history, that my mother had colon cancer, so I should get that checked out. I can remember sitting in the room waiting for the consultant thinking, yep, I'm definitely going to die. This is it. I was in my 40s, but I so believed genetics was such a big part of this. And I didn't think about nutrition, which is crazy. So I had the coronary artery calcium scan, lower left quadrant pain, colonoscopy, low level niggly things like athlete's foot permanently for 30 years. I had a terrible stress rash that used to come out when I was overworked constantly, just looked absolutely terrible, little red dots all over this area here. That was terrible. And it was awful. By the way, I'm deaf. I went deaf in my 20s. I wear hearing aids. I lip read. And that's just nothing to do with diet whatsoever, or possibly nothing to do with diet. I suppose I'll never know. But anyway, so here I was getting into my 40s. I was training people, started to see I had a little bit of a belly, which really shouldn't have been there because I wasn't eating lots of calories. That stupid word, which is really just a measurement of heat. Nothing to do with nutrition whatsoever. If you want to study the digestive system, don't get some food, put it in a metal chamber and set fire to it, because that's not what the digestive system is. And that's how they measure calories, by the way. You're thinking, what is this idiot talking about? So, right, let's get to my good journey. So I'm at 45 and I start seeing actual people trying to reverse their diabetes, and I'm doing the food guidelines and getting absolutely nowhere. Of course, there are some people that were getting a little bit better, because anyone that comes to see somebody about their diabetes or obesity is trying to make a change. Okay, so that might be that they have gone from tons of junk food to no junk food, taking out Coca-Cola, Pepsi, those sort of things, not taking out orange juice. Oh no, because that's healthy allegedly. But the people that started to come in that were doing really well was like about 10% of the people I saw. And I would love to have taken credit for all their great successes. But every time I spoke to them about what do you think's working, they sort of paraphrasing all said, not listening to you. And I didn't get hurt by this. I was just really intrigued. And everybody that was doing really well was doing this thing where they were lowering their carbohydrates. It wasn't called keto then. Certainly there was nobody carnivore then. Well, not that I know of. And I don't think that term really was phrased until later by Dr. Sean Baker. So I spent 5 years observing this and thinking, wow, I really have got this all wrong. That's when I decided to do further study and did my second degree in my life, my second honours degree. I've got one in English, but I decided to do physiology and health sciences. And it all started to come together, especially when I added the phlebotomy and doing the bloods and setting up a private blood test center. So it was amazing to realize I'd been misled, and I fell completely for it. So I got to age 50 and I thought, well, nothing is improving. I am doing everything. I am eating less. I am moving more. I am eating fruit and veg. I am doing 65% of my plate is carbohydrates. I'm not eating red meat. I'm not doing saturated fat. I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to go 180. I'm going to see what happens, because these crazy folks that are coming in doing low carb seem to be doing really well. And of course, as you probably guessed, because you're watching this channel and you're a big fan of Brett's, you know that the next thing I'm going to say is, wow, did it make a difference? Straight away, literally in 4 weeks, I could not believe the difference. I was not bitter and cross at this time. I was confused. How had I been so duped? I'm quite an intelligent person. I don't know, but I was. I completely fell for it, the food guidelines. So if you're doing this way of eating, I've just cut to the chase for a little bit, should be for later on, and people are giving you stick, it's because they care about you and they're misinformed. I don't think anyone out there is being nasty. All right. So just try and remember that you were fooled too once, and then your eyes were opened. Right. Anyway, it's like the old joke, how do you know someone's a vegan? They tell you. Right. So, don't go out and try and convert people. Just let them come to you. But anyway, right. So 6 weeks in, I realized this is a great thing to do. So I carried on doing that. And then about 3 years into it, you just get curious. Well, maybe if I got rid of the carbs a little bit more, then maybe I'll get even better. So I went keto, and it was a sort of parallel existence with Ken Berry. I have subsequently interviewed Ken on my channel a couple of times, and I didn't know him at the time, but it was really spooky because he was doing the same things about the same time I was doing it, and then he was thinking about carnivore, eating this all meat diet. So this was about 6.5 years ago, and I'd never heard of a ribeye in my entire life, and I'd never heard of Joe Rogan, and I'd never heard of Dr. Sean Baker. So this was all to come to me. So I did discover Dr. Sean Baker and Joe Rogan, and the carnivore diet seemed like a crazy thing, but definitely something that resonated with me. So I did what everyone else does. Thought 30 days. I'll try it for 30 days. That was on my 55th birthday. That's how I can remember all these things, because I'm one of those that likes a milestone to get to the next thing. And I thought 30 days. Let's see this. Wow, it was amazing. Luckily, I can do a lot of blood. So within 6 weeks, my testosterone, for instance, at 55, without any enhancements, apart from going carnivore, had gone up 30%. I felt better. I looked even better. I'm very active. I mean, my football coach says to me, he's never seen anybody of 60 move like I do. I had to clarify he meant in a good way, and he did mean in a good way. So all the things that were bad about me, my teeth were completely ruined by by a carb high diet. Carnivore won't reverse how bad my teeth are, for instance, and I'm British, so they're going to be bad anyway. But the things it can reverse are things like my eyesight. My eyesight is better. The reason I mention my deafness is because every single year I have to go to an audiologist and I have a test, and I see a gradual decline in my hearing, even though it's severe. So I'm not doing a graph very well because it's already way down, less than 25% compared to an average person. And it's gone down and down and down and down and down. And when it went to low carb, the decrease sort of leveled out a little bit. So I wasn't getting as deaf year on year. And then when I went carnivore, I actually saw an uptick. And I could see that with empirical data, simple things like the volume of the app on my phone, turning up my hearing aids volume. I didn't need the volume so high. So I could see that. So my hearing got slightly better. I'm not saying that carnivore will take someone who's severely deaf and make them be able to hear. My eyes got better. I'm less sensitive to the sun. I find it easier to keep my body composition good. I'm not one of those people that finds it easy. I said easier. Okay, so I fall into the trap of, well, when I started coaching, thinking I had to be perfect. And I think that is true to a certain extent. But I think people also like you to be human. And I fall into the traps of all of those things. But it's been such a revelation. You're right about the success stories, because my success story is actually nothing compared to some of the people I've coached. And I got quite tearful at the Carnivore Conference. The UK's first Carnivore Conference was just last weekend. I know this is evergreen. It's going to be out on YouTube for the rest of our lives, but this is 2024 when I'm talking right now. And I was talking about two people in particular, and I just got choked talking about them, because one of my people was given 2 weeks to live. He had less than 5% kidney function, and he believed everything that the food guidelines had told him. He wasn't getting anywhere, diabetic, blood pressure problems, was going blind, would need injections in his eyes. Tim, his name is, wonderful guy. And he's on peritoneal dialysis. So he's pretty sick. And he came to me with his wife, Francie, and said, I've seen you on YouTube. I like what you're saying. Is there anything you can do to help me? And of course, it's root cause. Brett, this is the thing that we talked about the other day, which you're brilliant at. Root cause. I said, well, what's the most common cause of kidney problems? Well, diabetes. He knew that. These people that we see now, they're educated in some things. And I said, right, well, let's treat your diabetes, and the knock-on effect might be your kidney improves. Well, within 3 weeks, He was off his diabetic medications. Within 4 weeks, he was off his blood pressure medications. And a proviso here, which again, you're very good at, Brett, is you have to work with your physician, because your medications are going to change. You're going to need less insulin or whatever, or metformin, whatever you are being prescribed. Oh, I hope you haven't got insulin, because that's about the worst thing you could do, really, unless you're type 1, of course. Your blood pressure meds, they're going to need to be looked at, because you don't want to have issues. So he worked with his physician. Great. Went to have his retina checked out after week 4. The guy said, you don't need injections anymore. I don't know what you're doing, but keep on doing what you're doing. So this, this is great. His peritoneal dialysis, which you do overnight, is not the nicest thing in the world. Even that became better. The fluids became easier to manage. He sleeps better. So that story is a million times more powerful than my story. My story matters. And this is what I want to say to people. It matters to you. All right. So don't judge yourself by other people you see online, because yes, like I say, I've got over 200 video success stories, over 1,000 clients. And I would say 99% of those stories are much more powerful than mine, but mine mattered to me. So don't think, oh, I've only got £5 to lose. It doesn't really matter. Oh, my blood pressure isn't that bad. My diabetes, it's manageable. It doesn't really matter. It does in the long term. If you want to have health span and reduce the disease span of your life, or have zero disease span, then you can take control at any age. All right. I'm going to be interviewing a 99-year-old next week, a prisoner of war camp survivor who is 99.
Wow.
And still talking about, how can I change my patio door so I can get out into my garden and be more active? 99. All right. So you have got no excuse, unless you're 102, which is his sister, by the way, and they're going to go out and have a party next week. So anyway, right. I'm 60. I did it at 50. If you're 60, 70, 20, and you feel like you've got problems, you should be looking at the food guidelines and literally thinking, I need to do 180 degrees turn on this.
That is simply incredible. And that's Tim who you're referencing, because I was kind of previewing some of your channel.
Yes.
And is he still on dialysis right now?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the thing is, we will get the function back. Now, this is another thing. When I did this, I've been doing 15 years rehab. Maybe 5 years ago, I would not have been so categoric, but I am now, because I needed to get to about 1,000 clients to feel categoric. The protocol works. That's it. It works. If you treat the root cause, it works. Okay, so we're looking to get that function back. We've had people go from EGFR, which is not a great metric, and maybe we'll talk about that later, of 14 up to 120. All right, this is not a sort of miracle. I'm not going to give people false hope, and I'm not living in cloud cuckoo land. If a nephron dies, it dies. I get that. All right, so don't mix this up with function. You can get the function back. You can get the filtration rate back. You can make your life a lot easier. All right. I have people that were on a transplant list who aren't now, who don't need to. So you can return it. Protein is not dangerous to your kidney. It's actually protective. You still have to moderate what you're doing. And when you get to stage 4 and 5, it's a little bit different to the protocol between 1 and 3. Because we need to look at, some of the electrolytes, just some of the things. Water intake is another one, which is a big thing that I'm into. People can drink too much water. That puts a strain on the kidneys. It will put your blood pressure up, for instance. Only this morning I was talking to someone that took my advice to get this. I have got no affinity with these urine tests, by the way, no commission or anything. It's just like $10 for 100 strips, and it will tell you your nitrates, your protein, your pH, your blood. Specific gravity is the key one. Ketones, bilirubin, and glucose. Specific gravity is not having clear water, right? You don't want to have completely clear urine, because you need that score to be about 0.3 or 1.3, depending on how the lab is set up. And it will tell you that you've got waste in your urine, which you should have. It should be straw colored. Well, if you drink a big glass of water, I mean, I've got here, this is my glass of water for the entire day, which has a bit of salt in it and a little splash of lime. Great stuff. And I won't drink that down. If I did, that would put if I gulp that down now, that would put my blood pressure up. If you find this hard to believe, Go back to any time you've been in the doctors and had a blood pressure measurement and it's been low. The first thing the nurse, doctor, physician will say is, take a glass of water, will you please? Just have a drink. Dehydration. That's what they think it is. Nuance of that is it isn't really dehydration. It's more about fluid balance and electrolytes. But anyway, just to prove the concept that water will put your blood pressure up, that's why I'm mentioning that. So we basically focus on keeping your blood glucose down, so therefore no carbohydrates or very low carbohydrates. We keep water to a appropriate amount, which is drinking to thirst, and then we look at a few of the other electrolytes that we need to sort of manage. And then there's a list of 10 foods. Now, people will think, oh, he's got the UK carnivore there. These would be no good for me. I'm not carnivore. 5 of those foods are not carnivore. I always say to people, as you get healthier, you'll move up that list and cross a few of the ones off the bottom, because you'll realize the more you get towards an animal-based way of eating, the better it will be. And then there's 10 no-no foods in that protocol, which are not helpful whatsoever for many different reasons. And whenever I tell anyone or talk to somebody about their kidneys, they tend to have their partner or somebody with them, because normally that is a thing that you both go through, like the peritoneal dialysis. For those that don't know, it's a catheter, goes straight into your stomach. It uses your bodily abilities to filter fluids. It's fantastic compared to like the junction they can put in your arm. But anyway, you're sleeping with a thing stuck in your belly, and it's cleaning your fluids out, basically. That's what it's doing the filtration that your kidney should be doing. And that's going to affect the partner. Well, everyone says, you know, I'm sleeping so better, so I get the partner on. The point being, when I go through the list of 10 things that you shouldn't really eat if you've got a problem with kidneys, the partner will laugh. This happened, like I say, with this lady, Francie. She said, well, that's everything he eats. And I said, well, there you go. That's why you got bad kidneys. So it sort of proves itself sometimes. But I think the thing is, you know, going back to these misconceptions, as you know from your past, and, you know, really, I'll just take my hat off to you, because it's really difficult to admit you're wrong, really difficult to do that big turnaround, especially when you've been involved and you've pushed things that you thought were true. I did it. I thought high carb was great, and I thought, you know, gels and carb loading was fantastic. Even when I won those medals, and I was doing pretty good. I was 96th in a race of 10,000 people. So, you know, I was no slouch, but I would have done better on carnivore without a shadow of a doubt, I mean, I'm feeling like when I'm playing football, I am at least 20 years older than everyone else around there. On Wednesday, you know, still banged in 4 goals. So I'm doing okay. I know this way of eating works for me, and I know it works for people I coach. The only big struggle I think that comes across, well, 2 things maybe, is sugar addiction or emotional eating. I'll put those together because they do often go hand in hand. That can be very difficult, and unhelpful members of your friends or family. I think that is a difficult one to get around, because if your friends and family don't really buy into it, it does make life difficult. And this is why the sugar addiction, the other one, is also a problem, because if you want to give up smoking, everyone will support you. No one's ever come to me and said, right, Stephen, I'm taking up smoking for my health. We all know it's not good for you, right? So, but people still do it. So you'll get support. Same with alcohol. You know, no one says, right, do you know what? I'm going to go on the lash 3 nights a week. I'm going to get absolutely out of my, off my face with drink for my health. They don't do that. So if you want to get away from alcohol, people will support you. If you say, do you know what? I'm not coming to that coffee because I don't want the pastries. No one's going to say anything good about you. They're just going to talk about you behind your back. And that's the difference. That is a real problem. That's a genuine problem. And that's one of the things that we need to get into, not in this interview, but like as in the space where we just get a little bit more realistic about that type of issue. And emotional eating, I think that's, you know, when I talk about my story, I talk about situational things that have a slight emotional attachment. I used to go to the cinema and always have a hot dog and a Coke. That was my thing. That was my sort of treat. So at the weekend, I wouldn't do it every night. And then it sort of, the realization came to me that I've never in any other situation ever thought, do you know what I really fancy right now? Hot dog and Coke. So it was situational. I knew it was the cinema. So I went to this way of eating. I had to replace it. And that's the other thing. I think if you've got something that you like doing and you can't do it anymore, you have to find a replacement rather than completely eliminate. So cooked up some bacon, cut them into little strips, put them in a Ziploc bag. Wow, that's great. But then I went a little bit deeper with that and thought, why do I have to eat when I'm at the cinema? I mean, that is, again, a construct of society, isn't it? So don't tend to worry about that now. But if you want to partake in all that, then at least you can by having your own food there and that sort of thing. So, wow, I've gone on for a long time. Sorry about that, Brett.
No, well, I love it. And also, I'm having a little, my camera's delayed, so I look really choppy. So it's better that they just focus on you. But a couple things that you mentioned there, especially with as drinking your little glass of water, this was something that caught me off guard as I first kind of started going down the whole ketogenic world, is that because we're all taught and conditioned, drink excessive amounts of water. And there's a couple of different reasons why, especially in the weight loss world, because, you know, it fills you up. If you have 2 glasses of water right before you eat your meal, you're suddenly, you know, for a couple seconds, it'll fill the stomach a little bit. Drink 8 to 10 glasses of water a day. No. And what I finally figured out was that, and this is something that I have to really work with my clients, because again, many people, especially because most of the people I'm working with are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and they're getting up 2, 3 times a night to have to go to the bathroom. And what they don't realize is that, and nobody realizes, and this needs to be something that we all collectively as a community get out there, is most of the water that the body uses is self-generated. It's part of the processing of glucose and fatty acids. And again, when you're drinking, when you're eating fats, you create 3 times the metabolic water, the output of creating ATP, than you do if you are burning glucose, sugar. On top of that, if you're predominantly eating glucose, not only are you creating so much less metabolic water at a cellular level, but you need to use 3 times more water, because all that glucose going in the bloodstream needs 3 molecules of water attached to it to get moved around, whereas the fats just move in a different system through the lipoproteins around the body, because fat and water doesn't mix, so it needs to get there through a different delivery mechanism. So by being high sugar, you're making yourself constantly thirsty all the time, and then it just becomes a vicious cycle, and you never wind up allowing your body to hydrate yourself the way you're supposed to. So once for the first time in my life, after a lot of yo-yo dieting and being a certified coach, not a practicing in my previous career, but a certified, won't go into that. But it's just like, once I stopped drinking all the water, you stop running to the bathroom, you start having normal urine color, you start retaining the sodium, the potassium, instead of just eliminating out of your system right away. And everything starts working and feeling much better. I also had a stint with a kidney disease management company. So I with what you're saying, everything that you just said, I more than 150% agree with. It's just dead on. And yes, you can't necessarily repair a damaged nephron to make it a healthy nephron, but the kidneys can definitely function. And also, what I found so powerful from your talking about your ears is that it's to me, and this is why my whole channel is focused on metabolic therapy, is that metabolic therapy does not exist without living under the curve of nutritional ketosis for, we'll say, the bulk of what you're doing. It's not 24/7. You can have one big protein meal that's going to throw you out for 3-4 hours, and you're metabolically flexible. You're going to come back, but it's the healing state. And so all of a sudden it makes, when you're telling your story, it makes complete sense to me that this is why your healing, or, your hearing is improving because everything in the body starts improving, which is why you have hundreds of success stories and thousands of coaching success stories. And you go on these other channels where they're just interviewing people, and all they did was they cut out the crap. And you can do this with keto, because when I lost my first 115 pounds, I was still having more broccoli and asparagus and rice cauliflower and things like this than I do now. There's other reasons why I move away from that, and has to kind of get into more the quantum biology aspects of things, the deuterium levels, and really the insecticide pesticide aspect of what's going on. It's even in the seeds of the food that's grown organically. It starts before it ever even sprouts. And so we are just so messed up with our existence as far as how we've transformed our food supply. And a line that I use over and over, and I'm going to come back to you here, is I'm just like, we're the only species on, well, there's a couple things that we're the only species that has to be taught what to eat. No other species uses randomized clinical trials to determine what to eat. And we're the only species smart enough to re-engineer our food and stupid enough to eat it. Because what got us here, and I'd like to ask you this question too, because I'm sure this has probably come up in your study and just experience. But with me, because I was in 3 different industries that all got corrupted by all of this, and nobody can see past their nose, because metabolic health was just the elephant in the room. But when it freaked me out so bad that, oh my God, I'm from the health insurance, I'm from the population health management, wellness, disease management, and I had a pharmacist in my background. And I'm like, they're all creating the problem that we're living within and exasperating it. And so I had to go down the rabbit hole. And so I found people like Nina Teicholz, like Gary Taubes, that were just incredible investigative journalists. And what you really find out with all of this is that almost everything from our past that has to do with health issues is more from a malnutrition standpoint. People just weren't getting enough nourishing food. And just as you mentioned, you were getting it predominantly from those healthy fruits and vegetables. But when you actually put it on a spreadsheet next to the red meats, the liver, just any red meat, eggs, they so pale in comparison, they're almost nutrient devoid before you even get into anti-nutrients. But have you seen that too? That almost that to me, it's like everything from our past was people not getting proper nutrition, being malnutritioned. And then we just went down the narrative that the food that gives you the most malnutrition is what we talked into being the healthiest food for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the weirdest, funny, sort of ironic things that used to happen when I was doing the clinic with the obesity and diabetes. The people that were obese, I'd say, I know you're not going to believe this, but you're malnourished. And they would sort of point to their body or tap their belly and go, malnourished? And I'm like, yep, absolutely. You're eating a ton of the wrong things, but your body's not getting the protein it needs. It's not getting the fats it needs. Whenever people talk about calorie restriction, that's a misnomer. When you actually look at what you're saying, you're deliberately underfeeding your body, but you're also underfeeding it things like essential micronutrients. So if you restrict calories, which is a ridiculous way of looking at food anyway, you're restricting protein, you're restricting essential fats, you're restricting salt, you're restricting your electrolytes. So it's so ludicrous to think that, and you're always hungry. It's just the craziest way of dealing with body composition. If you're constantly hungry and thinking of food, it's because your body is smart and it's saying, hey buddy, we need some protein, hey buddy, we need some fats, whatever it is. And instead of people realizing that, what happens is they believe the mainstream media that it's all about calories and nothing else. A calorie is a calorie is a calorie, which is completely, you can just scratch the surface and you know that's rubbish. Protein and carbohydrates are completely different. You can eat a ton of carbohydrates, it's not going to make anything in your body, and you can eat a ton of protein and it's going to go to structure, it's going to make stuff. Essential fatty acids are going to make things. The myelin sheath around your nerves is going to be made by cholesterol. You can't say anything about carbohydrates. They're not essential. Our body makes them on demand. That's it, from gluconeogenesis. You do not need to eat them. And that's, again, another thing, because if you get any biochemistry book where they say you need 120 grams of carbohydrates over a 24-hour period for your brain, well, that's taken as we got to eat 120 grams, but that's not true. You just need to make it. That's it. And it's never, the nuance is never pointed out. So when people, bring that old phrase out, oh, you need glucose for your brain. Yes, you do. You don't. Where does it say you have to eat it? It doesn't say that. If your brain needs it, it will demand it, and your liver will come up trumps with gluconeogenesis, which is a thing. And then people will say, oh, well, that's really tiring for your body. Okay, so a thing that you do every single night when you're asleep, that it does 24/7 the entire time you're alive, is allegedly really bad for your body. Do you really think our body is that badly designed? But stuffing yourself full of pizza or even, veg and fruit is great for you, and that all that digestive energy is irrelevant. So this is crazy. And how you look at when you digest food or ingest food. So if you've taken in some protein and it's 1,000 calories, well, 250 of those calories, if you buy all this rubbish, is going to be used to digest it, because you need about 25% of the energy that you have ingested to process it, and it's only about 3 to 5% for carbohydrates. So they're not even like for like in any way, shape, or form. They are not the same. I guarantee if you eat 2,000 calories, I'm not going to use that word much more because it is ridiculous, but let's say you eat 2,000 calories of Fruit Loops and you have 2,000 calories of salmon, you're going to look very different if that's your diet. And the person eating salmon is going to look pretty good, and they're going to have some great brain health. And the Fruit Loop people are going to be Fruit Loops. I mean, that's what they're going to be. It's just ridiculous the way we look at it. But the malnourishment is a really interesting thing, because people really get it once you say to them, well, the reason you're a bit overweight is you're constantly looking for food because your body is crying out for protein. You give it more protein, you give your body more fats, you won't feel these cravings so much, and you'll look better. And
Absolutely. And
you
it's
so good. Yeah.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut into you there. But the other flip of it is when you're on the higher glucose and it's now raising the A1C, and the A1C is just a measurement of what's called advanced glycation end products. And it's, you are deteriorating the protein, the outside of that blood cell, because of it's sitting always in a high sugar environment. But this is where the neuropathy comes from. This is where the bad eyesight comes from. This is where how we destroy the kidneys, because most of it's from high diabetes, high blood sugar. The blood pressure also factors into it. But the higher you're keeping and you're always spiking your glucose, the more you're basically rotting from the inside out. I remember when I was into this kind of about a year, and I was watching this show because I like watching cooking things. I always have my whole life. And somebody was talking about how to tenderize meat. And what they did is they had like this huge brisket, like 20-pound brisket. And they covered it overnight with 10 pounds of sugar. And they were describing on how, look at how this just destroys the meat, how it just makes it so soft and completely it's like the meat is being digested just sitting in sugar. And that's what's happening to the inside of everybody's body by constantly keeping the glucose over the amount that is needed for the body to do what it needs. Yes, glucose is necessary. However, most of our organs prefer fatty acids. When you look at a PET scan with somebody going through cancer and they're doing the pressed pulse scenario, the heart doesn't even show up as using any glucose at all. It prefers fatty acids and ketones. The brain runs excellent for most of it, also on ketones. And when you spike up in the brain, you got too much blood sugar going on. It has to convert it to fructose, which is even a worse thing to have in the brain, but it's just a defense mechanism to tap down the amount of glucose that's going there. And now we believe that that fructose leads to the amyloid plaques that are being associated with Alzheimer's disease. And so it's just a vicious cycle.
Yeah. And I think gave me a buzzword there that I just want to pick up on when you talked about spikes, and we're talking about glycation. I do want to mention why the HbA1c on this way of eating is a little bit irrelevant. If you don't mind, just giving me 5 minutes to go through this, because
I totally
this is
understand where you're going. Do it. It's great.
this is where the phlebotomy side of things comes in. But I want to get some common sense first. So if you do your average blood glucose, let's just for the sum, so people can get this. Let's say it's 100, and you think, well, my average is 100, right? Okay, it's 100. Well, was that a day where you went up to 150, and then you came down to 50, and then you went up to 150, then you came down to 50, then went up to 150, came down to 50, and so on? Because that will give you an average of 100, but you've been causing a lot of damage throughout the day with this 150 spike, and also not so great with the trough as well, because that's obviously going to need a lot of mediation from the insulin. So firstly, your average, is it full of spikes and troughs, or is it an average? Is it sort of like 105, 95, 100, which is much better, less damaging, we should say. Second thing is, now we've got continual glucose monitors, which when I started 15 years ago doing my training, they didn't want glucose monitors in the hand of patients. They didn't want you to have this knowledge. One of the things is, because all the things they're telling you, like eat oatmeal, you'll learn is rubbish. It's going to spike your blood glucose. They didn't want people to know that. So anyway, that's the first thing. Secondly, if your average is 100 and in the background your insulin is going up by 5% per year on your fasted insulin blood test, which I have a nice video to illustrate this. People want to see it on my YouTube channel. I think it's called Why the HbA1c is a Useless Metric, with this way of eating, because it's designed for people on a 40 to 65% carbohydrate diet. Small little diversion, because there's been this Australian study, by the way, that says a low carb diet causes type 2 diabetes. If you look at the study, I did a video about it this morning. The study, there's not one person on a low carb diet in the study. The lowest carbohydrate intake is 37.5%. That's about 185 grams of carbs. The study has got so much traction in the media, and it's a pile of poop, basically, because I don't know anyone on a low carb diet that is eating 100 grams of carbs, let alone 185. So anyway, right. So that's bought and paid for rubbish. So we're going to go back to what I was saying. So the HbA1c is a measure of your alleged average glycation over the period of 120 days for most labs. Well, when I did my training, one of the things of phlebotomy training, I was told, is if you get a low HbA1c and the person is hemolytic anemic, you mustn't tell them that they're not a diabetic, even though their HbA1c is very low. And well, why is that? Well, because the red blood cells are dying earlier. That's what hemolytic anemia is. They're not lasting the 120 days, or in some labs it's 90 days. But anyway, they're not lasting as long as they should be. So therefore, you get this artificially low HbA1c. Now, fast forward to me having lots of clients on this diet saying, well, my continual glucose monitor, my average is great. I go in and have a fasted insulin test, and that's great. I have a C-peptide test, and that's great. I don't understand why my HbA1c has gone up. And I'm like, well, I do. And there's a test that can prove this theory called the reticulocyte count, which is showing you the production of your red blood cells. And if your red blood cells are living longer, which the reticulocyte count does prove, therefore your HbA1c is going to be artificially high. So I don't care about the HbA1c, to be honest. I look at average blood glucose. Finger pricking is better. If you do that every single day, like 3 times a day, same time, you'll get your trends. That's it. That's all you got to do. We've got a Keto Mojo. I'm not, any of those brands. It doesn't matter. If it's calibrated right, you just go with that. Don't worry about the HbA1c. I see yours in the background. I've got a Keto Mojo. And it's just amazing that the HbA1c is so flawed. I mean, many metrics in this way of eating are flawed. We're talking about blood glucose at the moment. You can get a fructosamine test, which is a glycation over 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, but it's not fructose. This is the other thing, because it's got fructose in the name. You think, I can test my fructose. No, it's just called fructosamine, which is, the fact that you've got sugar or glucose attaching to a protein. But it gives you a 3-week average. If you want to do that, you can really get into it. But the best thing is your own blood every single day, and you're working out your average, or a continual glucose monitor, just go with that. And if you're still thinking there's problems, you're still worried, go and get your C-peptide measured, get your fasted insulin measured, and get your reticulocyte count measured, and get them interpreted by somebody that knows this way of eating. Because C-peptide is a proxy marker for insulin. When insulin is released from the vesicle, it's cleaved off, and so is C-peptide. So they're sort of in the bag together, and then off they go. Insulin has this half-life where it's not around for long, but C-peptide sticks around for a bit longer. So it's a good proxy measure. It's not the best, but it is a good proxy measure of production. So then we're talking about insulin sensitivity. That can be something. You could be very low with your blood glucose, and I'm thinking of a couple of people that I've coached, and one I'm interviewing next week, who operate on much lower blood glucose. So officially, they're hypoglycemic all the time. They're hypoglycemic when they're out in the forest chopping wood. So it's all about you as an individual, and these ranges, they are important. I'm not telling people to be foolhardy. You have to get used to the ranges that are optimal for your lifestyle and how you operate. When you become fat adapted, many people say, well, the numbers don't correlate to the normal ranges. Well, you're not normal. You're not their normal. You're not 40% to 65% carbohydrates. You're referring to the wrong thing. So if you're a runner, if I'm a 60-year-old runner and I do my 100 meters and it's XYZ time, and I constantly refer to the Olympics, the top 10 runners, I'm always going to be disappointed because I'm not comparing like for like. But if I compared myself to a bunch of 60-year-olds who have never ran in their life, I'm going to think I'm golden and wonderful because I'm so much better. So it's got to be contextual. All your numbers have got to be about how you live, your activity levels, what you're eating, and the normative ranges are an okay sort of marker. We spoke extensively about the fantastic test you did, and you spoke with such knowledge. It was great, but it's still contextual, isn't it? You've got to know, what do these actually mean, and what is the person's lifestyle? So it is amazing. I think we're still recording, but Brett, you're having problems with your Wi-Fi. But so that's why I talk about blood glucose and the HbA1c the way I do, is because your red blood cells are going to be lasting longer. And then it has a knock-on effect for all other bloods, because that is such a key thing. The body is making 120 to 180 million red blood cells every single minute. So imagine that they're lasting longer. You won't need that amount of production. So there's other things that are happening. When the red blood cells break down, for instance, it recycles everything. The body just uses everything. There's hemoglobin in there. And hemoglobin is the thing that HbA1c measures, hemoglobin. But anyway, when it breaks down and gets recycled, you've got two things there. I've just said hemoglobin. Heme is iron. So you start to recycle that iron. Now, if you're recycling iron, but your blood cells are not breaking down as often, so you haven't got this 180 million per minute being made, and therefore there's 180 million breaking down and releasing heme, you've got less recycled iron coming in. And this explains why, when you look at, say, an iron panel for someone that's on carnivore, you can have slightly higher ferritin, because the body detects that you have got this this supply you used to get is now maybe a third of what it used to be, or 2/3 of what it used to be. So therefore, we need to store a little bit more iron in the ferritin as ferritin, which is the long-term storage of iron for the body. And that's what we're talking about. When we talk about bloods, we talk about looking at the context of keto or low carb or carnivore. Do they make sense? Are we comparing like for like? Are we looking at what the actual results mean? And I think that's one of the things about phlebotomy that I'm really enjoying at the moment, is we can look at all these tests in a much better way. It's, for instance, thyroid. There's this myth about keto tanking your T3. Well, T3 is needed in the movement of pyruvate across the mitochondrial membrane when you are using glycolysis, when you're processing glucose. Well, if you're not processing glucose, you don't need so much T3. So again, we look at the whole panel. I had a guy telling me that his doctor's going on about his subclinical thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH, which isn't a thyroid hormone, by the way. It's a pituitary gland hormone. And that's telling the thyroid to make a certain amount of hormones. Well, what's it trying to make it make? It's trying to make it make T4. So we looked at his T4, and his alleged subclinical TSH was perfect. So the range for TSH was 0.4 to 4, and his was sort of like 0.37, 0.36, that sort of thing. And he was subclinical according to the normal ranges. Should do quotation marks for that. But when we looked at what does TSH do, it's telling your thyroid to make T4. Okay, well, your T4, the range was 10 to 20, and his was constantly sort of 15, 16, 17, 14, 15, always in range and always pretty much in the middle. And we had 4 years of data saying this. So I just said to him, well, let's pretend you're the first person on earth that's ever done a blood test, and we're trying to work out what is the perfect range of TSH. What is the perfect range? Well, if we're saying that T4 needs to be this level, and you are slap bang in the middle of the range every single year, we can conclude that your TSH is actually the perfect range. So, that's what we did. We told him that, and he was really happy because it makes total sense. TSH isn't subclinical in that situation because it's doing what it's supposed to do. You need less of it, and this is the thing. So we need less T3. We need less. We need less carbohydrate. That's obvious. There are some other things like vitamin C. When you are processing heme iron, you don't need vitamin C. Whereas when you're processing non-heme iron, you do, because non-heme iron is Fe3+, whereas heme iron is Fe2+, which is ferrous, which is what you need to get into the enterocytes and all that sort of stuff. So when you eat non-heme iron, the body has to go through lots of loops to get it into the ferrous state. So what happens? It goes through the stomach, it's acted on by hydrochloric acid, then it goes into small intestine, basically. Well, when it's getting into there, or the duodenum as well. So the enterocytes, they want it in a different form. They don't want this Fe3+. So it goes through a thing called vitamin C ferroreductase, which is an enzyme which needs vitamin C to take the Fe3+ and make it into ferrous iron, which the body can use. And therefore, we need less vitamin C. So all these little myths that you need this, you need that, are based on the wrong body type and the wrong phenotype and the wrong physiology. Because if you're eating heme iron, you don't need so much vitamin C. So all of these things are easily explained, and that's one of the things I do in the coaching. If people want to book me to go through bloods, to have the proper interpretation in this way of eating, I do that. That's one of the things that I really enjoy doing. I do like to work with doctors. I always encourage the clients to talk to their physician, healthcare provider, and go through all the bloods with them. And it's amazing. I don't prescribe. That's not what I do. I just give people the information. So, for instance, if they're worried about their T3 tanking, and there's no symptoms, by the way, that's another thing. You've got to look at symptoms. That's really important. It isn't just about numbers. It is about symptoms as well. So, I think it's a really interesting job. I'm loving what I'm doing. It's like you say, a lot of success stories. I think I try to make things as layman's as possible. If you're worried about T3, if you're worried about high ferritin, you look at the other markers around to make sure that there isn't actually a problem. So thyroid, you would look at reverse T3, free T3, the TPO TG antibodies, just general things like that. Maybe zinc, selenium levels, because they're sort of cofactors. And if you're looking at iron, then you get the whole iron panel, serum iron, TIBC, which is total iron binding capacity, unbound capacity, or unbound iron binding capacity can also be looked at. Ferritin, transferrin saturation, all of those things, you get the whole thing. And also then you add in the symptoms. Are you having symptoms of low iron? And if you're not, then, one reading, as long as we can explain it, and there's a lot more to iron. Maybe you can have me back another time and we'll talk about that. But anyway, if people want to get me, I'm at the ukcarnivore.com. We also have a school community, myself and Richard Smith. That's Low Carb School. Hopefully, Brett, you'll be able to put a link in the description. But anyway, it's been really nice to talk to you. and hopefully you'll have me back soon.